Welcome to Inspire Campfire, a podcast where ordinary people tell their stories of extraordinary adventure. These are campfire stories meant to inspire the rest of us to light the fire within, get outside, follow our dreams, and return to tell our own stories. Ready? Let's strike the match.
Welcome to the show. I'm your host, Scott Wurzbacher, and today we're getting a special look into the system of land management right here in the United States that so many of us take for granted. To date, this podcast has released over 130 conversations about adventures, many of which have taken place on public lands, such as the Appalachian Trail and the Grand Canyon. So many more that are managed by the United States Department of the Interior. Our guest is Giovanni Rocco, who currently serves as the press secretary and spokesperson for the department. Today, he joins us in his personal capacity to talk about his life, career, and love of nature. Gio, as his friends call him, was born in Chile and immigrated to the United States at age 9. He's had an impressive political career, and in his role at the Department of the Interior, he is helping to communicate on topics such as climate change, clean energy, and conservation of America's lands and waters. I, for one, am extremely grateful for the access we have to the beautiful parks and lands right here in this country. And I'm so excited to share this story of someone who works daily at the highest levels of leadership to protect them. Gio, welcome to the campfire.
Thank you, Scott, for having me. It's so exciting to be here to talk about our beautiful public lands.
Man, I mean, it's just so cool that you get to do what you get to do. You're following your passion, your education. There's so many things that have kind of come together in your life, and I can't wait to kind of get into that story and find out how all of it happened. But for listeners, I wonder, again, I mean, there's so much that the Department of Interior does that I think people take for granted. Honestly, I mean, you know, this podcast is all about adventures. So much does happen on public lands, whether it's a hike in the Grand Canyon or a through hike on the Appalachian Trail, and somebody's got to manage all of this. So for listeners, could you give us just a little bit of background on what the Department of Interior is and what they do?
Yeah, absolutely. So the department is one of the oldest agencies in the federal government, established in the mid to late 1800s. And, you know, the mission of the department has evolved in some ways over time, but at its core, it's an agency that manages our nation's public lands and waters. And so most people, of course, know the National Park Service, right? Our beautiful national parks. Perhaps people might know about the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and maybe folks, especially folks out west, might know about the Bureau of Land Management that manages public lands. And so those are the three main ones that manage public lands in America. But the department covers a bunch of other issues. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, the Bureau of Indian Education are two bureaus that fall under the department. And their role is essentially to manage the trust relationship, the government relationship that the U.S. federal government has with tribes across the country. And that's the relationship that the federal government has had since the start of America. And of course, that relationship has changed over time. And now we have a leader who cares deeply about that government-to-government relationship and making sure that tribes are part of decision making. And so that's another part of the department. There's some regulatory agencies as well that do work to make sure that that our public lands are free of pollution. And there's also agencies like the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management that works every day to make sure that we have clean energy long into the future. The offshore wind industry has been jump-started under this current Secretary Holland and President Biden. And so the department covers so much, but I think to simplify things, it's a department that manages our public lands, and we can add natural resources to that as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a big umbrella that covers so many things. And maybe as we kind of get into a little bit of the history, maybe it'll make sense and how it kind of filters up.
Yeah.
But I think for listeners, I know I'm an avid outdoors person, and I've tried so much throughout my life to take advantage of national parks and wildlife refuges, also national forest. And so there's some different things that are covered, some things aren't. And so it would be really helpful, I think, for listeners, if you could maybe give us a little bit of a description of some of the different areas, like specifically the ones that people know the best. Like, what is the difference between the national park, wildlife refuge? Maybe if we could cover some of those.
Yeah. So without getting into the specifics of sort of how Congress and the law designates them, the best way to simplify it is a national park generally will preserve something that is of natural or historical value, right? So you think of a place like Yellowstone or Yosemite, which of course are beautiful natural wonders. The Everglades, for example, as a national park that's preserving natural wonders. There are some parks across the country that also preserve things that are of historical value. A wildlife refuge is essentially a refuge that is established to protect fish and wildlife, right? And you'll find them all across the country, and so their purposes vary quite drastically, depending on what kind of animals are there, right, or what kind of life is living there. But what they have in common is that both national parks and wildlife refuges are places that anyone can go, anyone can access them. They're all public lands. One other distinction I would have to mention is national parks. A lot of them have an access fee, right, which varies depending on the park. And wildlife refuges, they are almost all free, with a very very small exception of a few of them that require very small entrance fee. But that's to simplify. That's kind of the difference between a wildlife refuge and a park, a national park.
Yeah. And you actually sent me to the DOI website that gave me some great information. There's actually a page called America's Public Lands Explained, and it goes through, 10 or 12 different types of public lands and kind of specifies what each one of those is. That was super helpful. And I definitely would love to direct listeners to go there if they want to find out more. One of them, for example, like National Seashore and National Lakeshore, like what's the distinction between that and some of the other areas?
Oh, that I would not know. I'd have to talk to one of my expert colleagues on that.
Nice.
But yeah, if you go to that list, you'll find, I think national parks and refuges are at the top of that list.
They are.
Then it goes through a whole long list of places that when I was reading it too, I was like, oh, like I don't know what the difference is between a lakeshore and so I'd have to go back to my colleagues to ask about that, or read that website.
It's great. It is on the website. I just early in my life, my wife and I actually did a trip across country where we were just basically camping out of the car for 6 weeks. And, we went to all kinds of national parks and national forest. And I remember like coming down California right before you get to the Golden Gate Bridge, there's a national seashore there.
Yeah.
And I just, yeah, exactly. And I always just kind of wondered like what the distinction was between them. So it's so interesting to actually get into this. So I really appreciate that. Now, the national forest is different. And so I wonder, like, that's something I think probably I'd love to just, if you might be able to explain that as well, because I know that's a little bit different.
Yeah. So a national forest, you may think falls under the Department of the Interior, but that falls under the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And so, if you're a regular person, you go into a public land, you walk into a forest, you walk into a park, they might seem the same, right? The designation is just different. And that's purely sort of there's a bureaucratic story behind it of how it all happened. But essentially, at the start of our nation, national forests were seen as natural resources and things to be or a place where you could extract things from it, right? in this
Gotcha.
case being trees. And so it fell under the Department of Agriculture because it was seen as sort of a resource that the agricultural department could use. And so it's just been like that forever. But today, in our present day, our national forests are seen differently than they were 200 years ago. And certainly under this administration, we've been working to make sure that they're protected as well. And so different agency, but definitely just another place where folks can go out and recreate and enjoy the outdoors.
Yeah, no, it's so interesting because, physically, I remember 2 summers ago just going to Sequoia and Yellowstone, right? And as you're driving to those parks, you're passing through national forest as well. So you've got kind of a couple of different agencies that are involved as you're sort of
all across the country. You'll see that where you'll go to a park and then you'll be driving out or you'll be driving in and you'll see that there's a national forest right next door. I was recently in Arkansas, beautiful state, and I went to a national wildlife refuge. But right next to the refuge, there was a forest, a national forest. And so it's interesting because it's again different agency, but the roles and the land that is being protected often are just sort of hand in hand and side by side.
Yeah, and really, some people might wonder, why are there different agencies managing this different? Some of it has to just do with the history of it, right? And how it sort of all has come together.
Exactly. Yeah. There's, if America was being started today and you were trying to establish an agency that was, managing public lands and resources, you will probably have the Forest Service be part of Interior, but that's just not the case, right? These agencies have been around for so long, and it's just sort of it's sort of a bureaucratic history there.
It makes sense
how they ended up being where they are. Yeah.
It does make sense. So I'm curious, with the Department of the Interior, especially as it relates to protection of lands, National Park Service, a National Wildlife Refuge System. So is there any sort of history or key milestones you could share with us?
Well, the secretary recently went to Pelican Island in Florida. I have a soft spot for anything Florida. I grew up in Florida. My family still lives in Florida. And Pelican Island, where the secretary visited recently, was the first refuge to be, or the first place to become a national wildlife refuge.
Cool.
I would have to look up the year, but it was a very long time ago under President Roosevelt. And from there, the refuge system has grown quite a lot, and now there's over 500 refuges across the country. Every state has at least one refuge, which I often tell my friends who think that I only travel to national parks that I also travel to other beautiful areas, and a lot of those beautiful areas are national wildlife refuges, and they're beautiful. They're in many ways a lot more accessible than national parks, and like I said earlier, they're also free, which is always good. But under this administration, speaking about history a little bit more, we've established, I want to say 2, maybe 3 new wildlife refuges, and then most recently, one of the newest national monuments, which is something that brings me a lot of pride, is the Emmett Till National Monument, which there's 3 sites that cross between Illinois and Mississippi, and that is a national monument, is part of the national park system, and a national monument preserves a place that is important that has deep historical value, and Emmett Till was a young Black boy who was murdered, and there was a trial after that, and the perpetrators were let go, and they never faced any sort of punishment for murdering this child. And his mother, Mamie Till Mobley, she was from Chicago, and Emmett Till was murdered in Mississippi. When she went back to Chicago, she made sure that his memory would not be forgotten. She didn't want his death to be another death that was so common back in the day. And so she held an open casket funeral to show the nation what the brutality that Black folks at the time were receiving. And so that was a huge moment in U.S. history, a huge moment for civil rights, a moment that galvanized the nation. And that happened in the 60s, if I'm not mistaken. And it took all these years to get to the point where last year President Biden established the Emmett Till and Mamie Till Mobley National Monument in Chicago and in Mississippi to make sure that Americans know about this history, which I think is so important, to be able to tell all of America's history, the good and the bad. And I was lucky to be able to go to one of those sites in Mississippi last year, and just sort of, it's important that these places exist and these places are preserved, because what the National Park Service does is preserve a sense of place. Yeah. And there's nothing like going to a site where something happened to really see and feel the history, right? And see and feel what that meant for the community, what it meant for the country. And that monument is doing that. That monument is doing that. And so that's one of the things that I'm most proud of. And, I love history, and I think it's really important to be able to preserve that history and be able to tell it for generations to come. And we were able to do that with that monument.
Yeah. And so for you, how cool is that to be part of that, like, creation of these places that preserve history?
I mean, one of the ways I started getting involved in politics was in college. And it's one of those things where it's kind of like it's hard to sort of know where your life is going. But at first, I loved history, and that's how I got involved in politics in high school. Actually, I was in high school, and I just really loved history. And and it was 2008, and Barack Obama was running for president. I was like, oh my God, the first Black man. This is so historic. And that's how I got involved. And then in college, I became an activist, and I started just working around different issues. And again, I always thought about the history of it, right? It's like we've always had these movements, whether it's civil rights, LGBTQ rights, women's rights, immigrant rights, so sort of always just thinking about that history, and sort of my place in time is what motivated me to get involved in politics. And so now, to be at this agency, at this place where I have a role in helping preserve history, it's really cool. It's something that I never expected, never thought that I would be doing. But it's just really cool. And sometimes I just have to pinch myself that, I somehow ended up here. And it's just really awesome and really cool. And, one of my favorite things about traveling is just being with community and being with folks who have lived that reality, who've had that experience, whether it's directly or through their family members, and seeing the sense of pride that they feel when they see that their history is being preserved at the national level, right? That the president, that the secretary is paying attention, and that they're working to preserve their history, right? That's always beautiful to see, sort of the sense of pride that people have across the country.
Yeah, totally. So for you, I want to get into this. Like, you mentioned that this is work you never could have imagined doing. So how did this all come about for you? How do you end up in this incredible role that you're now in?
Yeah. So I'll take you back to college, which is what I just mentioned recently. You know, in college, I got involved in, I was an activist.
Yeah.
I was working primarily on immigrant rights and LGBTQ rights in Florida. And in 2015, I had a chance to move up to DC and do an internship on the Hill. So I interned on the Hill, and I love DC. I was here for 4 months, and I was like, okay, I need to live here. I need to come back. But I was still a junior in college, and so I had to go back. I graduated, and then it was 2016, and I had a friend who was working in the Hillary Clinton campaign at the time, down in South Florida. I grew up in Broward County,
Okay.
in Fort Lauderdale. And my friend said, "Why don't you come down here? Why don't you, you've been an activist, you've been an organizer, you could do that similar job here in Florida in your community and help, with this election." So I did that. I moved back home to South Florida, and we lost that election, but that was, I by that point I kind of got the bug, right? I was okay, this is what I want to do. I love being able to help in some way, and being involved in politics will give you that avenue. And so I eventually got a job in DC, where I've been living for the last 7 years. And in 2020, the Biden campaign reached out and asked if I wanted to join the campaign as a regional press secretary, and I said, let's do it. So I joined the campaign. I was based out of Raleigh, and I was primarily working in the Raleigh area, and also with Spanish media across the state. Then of course we won that election. And then one day, so of course that was November 2020. And then around February of 2021, one day I checked my email inbox, and I had an email from the White House, and they had reached out, and they asked me if I wanted to join the Department of the Interior as, at the time, deputy press secretary. And I was floored, because I was like, wait, like, who I am? Like, I thought it was just like one person, in this massive campaign in Raleigh, like, to have that recognition, was huge. And so anyway, so I said, yes. So
all right, hold on, time out a minute. Because you and I talked about this a little bit in advance. Like, I want to go back to like when you got that email. Like, what did that feel like? What were those moments like for you?
Oh, it was I was shocked. I honestly was shocked, because you're part of a campaign. There's always, kind of think like, okay, if we win, maybe I'll join the administration, maybe I'll do this, maybe I'll do that. But again, there's so many people who work in these campaigns. There's so many people who are well qualified. So I always thought like, okay, maybe I have a shot, but also like, I'm just one regular guy. Like, I didn't think I was anything special. And so to then get that email, and especially for that role, which at the time, to be quite honest, at the time I was like, I don't even think I'm ready for this. I was like, I don't think that I have the skills. I don't think I have the experience to do this job. But then sort of, the more I thought about it, and the more, sort of reality sunk in, I was like, well, if they believe in me, then I should believe in me too. If the White House team believes that I could do this, and why am I doubting myself? Why am I doubting my own skills?
Yes.
And so after the shock kind of like wore off a little bit, I was like, wait, like I feel like I could do this. I think I could do this. And so, I said yes, and then I went through the whole interview process and eventually, got that role.
So I think it's so cool. I guess I just want to reiterate what you said, just for people that are listening, right? That sometimes doubt themselves and don't think they can go after something. Like even the press secretary and spokesperson for the Department of the Interior felt that fear and doubt at some point.
Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah, and I think, one of maybe the lessons that I got out of that experience was just that uh sometimes it's hard to believe in yourself. But we all have someone that believes in us. Whether it doesn't have to be the White House, it could be somebody else. It could be literally your mom, your friend. And I think it's really important to believe people when they trust you, when they believe in your skills and who you are. I think we're all humans, and I think it's normal human nature to doubt ourselves. And that's okay, I think, as long as you realize that when you doubt yourself, there's others that are there for you. So if you don't believe yourself, you should believe your friends, your family, your coworkers.
Good to have supporters and encouragers around you. So Gio, one thing I think is really interesting, when you and I were talking, we kind of went back to your early days, like when you were growing up in Chile, and some of the experiences that you had even before college. Because you've come to this place where you're getting to practice like political science that you studied in college. It's clearly your passion, but it's in this area around land management and conservation, and nature is very central to all of this.
Mm-hmm.
And you had some early experiences that sort of connected you to that for me is, I just think it's so cool because you're in this like awesome job, but you're like being able to bring in some of those things, those early experiences, to this role that you have now. So I just wondered if you could talk about some of those early experiences in Chile, and like some of the more like wildlife related, nature related experiences that you developed over time.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, I was born in northern Chile in this town called Arica, which is a border town with Peru. And it's funny because I feel like oftentimes we, or at least I, forget sort of like, you move through life so quickly. You kind of just tend to not reflect often on sort of like where you came from. And it didn't sort of dawn on me until after I joined the department, sort of how when I was a kid, I was exposed to the outdoors all the time. And that was through my grandparents and my parents. And one of the earliest memories I have as a kid, and I must have been like 5 years old, 6 years old, was going with my grandparents we have this valley in Arica. It's mostly Arica's mostly a desert area, but there's this valley and there's a river that runs through it, and it's very lush. And one of my memories as a kid is going out there and just having a picnic by the river, and jumping in the river and just playing in the water, and like climbing the trees that were around. And that was sort of a very normal weekend activity that we would do. And recently I was also reflecting on how I actually don't remember when I learned how to swim. And I've always known how to swim. And I asked my mom about it, and she told me that it was because my grandpa on my dad's side, he would take me to the beach when I was a kid, and I learned how to swim with him at the beach. I was like, okay, I had no memory of that in my brain. That memory has faded, unfortunately. But I was like, oh, so like from before I could even form memories or retain memories, I was already outdoors, experiencing nature, going to the beach, going to the river, going to the valley, and just climbing trees. And I have to thank my grandparents for the most part for exposing me to the outdoors, and the beauty of the outdoors. And so now to be in this role, it in many ways feels like a full circle moment, right? To go from this kid who grew up in the outdoors and doesn't even remember because it was so
Yeah.
normal, like from such a young age, to now to have this opportunity to communicate to the nation and the world the work of the department and the importance of protecting and expanding access to the outdoors
Yeah.
is really neat, I think.
Well, and totally. And I think even you mentioned to me that you even had some schooling in
Yeah,
marine science.
yeah. Well, okay, so there was a moment in my life where I thought I was going to be a marine biologist. And so when I went to a high school that was marine science focused. It was a magnet school,
Yeah.
which magnet schools where
Yeah.
schools that
Yeah.
uh, have a focus in something, art
Mhm.
or science or whatever it is. And my school focused on marine science, and I thought I was going to be a marine biologist. But then I took a chemistry class and I almost failed it. And I was like, no, I don't think it's going to work out for me. But I still love the experience that I had. It was 4 years of high school where we were so lucky that we were exposed to the outdoors all the time on a weekly basis. And, we took just beautiful trips down to the Keys on where we would go snorkeling and, we'd go to the beach and do water testing and we'd go bird watching and we'd go camping and all those experiences really shaped sort of the way that I experience the outdoors. And I think in many ways sort of prepared me to do this job that I do now. And really, because it really instilled a deep love and appreciation for our nation's lands and waters, which we can't ever take for granted.
Right.
And for to sort of quickly tie back to the conversation about history that we had a moment ago, for a long part of our nation's history, we really didn't take our public lands and waters. We didn't respect our nation's public lands and waters. We extracted as much as we could from them. We polluted so many sites across the country, many sites that we'll never get back. We eradicated so many, beautiful animals. And so it's so important to keep that in mind and remember that, because like some places will never get back, and we have what we have today, and we have to protect what we have. And those 4 years of high school, going to the Everglades, which was it felt like my backyard, and it's this beautiful place that is so unique in the world. It really instilled a deep love and appreciation for what we have here in this country, and the importance again of protecting it so that we can enjoy it and future generations can enjoy it too.
Yeah, and I find it so interesting, like the just all of these experiences that you've had, like especially what you just talked about with like at one point having this like inner fire that says, I think I want to be a marine biologist. And I understand maybe the chemistry class, causes a minor little setback, but how cool it is that, now you're in this place where you get to do not just the science part, not just the nature part, but you also get to bring in like the history and the politics piece that you also love. It's like this bringing together. And I'm curious because a few minutes ago, you talked about like being offered this opportunity and sort of doubting yourself, but I'm almost wondering if like now you look back and see how all these pieces have come together. And like, to me, it's like, of course it's geo, right?
I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. It's one of those things where you I don't know. It's hard to plan sometimes in life,
Of
right?
course.
Um, and sometimes you just take things one day at a time, or especially when you're a teenager, you're just living your life. And when I was in high school, I didn't think I was going to be here. I was just this like immigrant kid who first generation. Like my parents didn't speak English. Like I was like, I'm gonna probably do something cool, but I never dreamed of working, for a presidential administration. But I was just living my life. I was just enjoying what I was doing, and just enjoying my little marine science school. And eventually, when I got to college, I was surrounded by friends who got me involved in activism, and really sort of sparked another fire in me, and in social change and social activism. And then somehow I ended up. Oh, and then I graduated, and then I worked on this presidential campaign, and then another presidential campaign, and now here I am, and somehow all those things are like tied together. But of course, when I was in high school, or certainly when I was a kid, there's no way for me to ever have envisioned that. So yeah, to your point, I feel like it probably does make sense, although it's kind of in a crazy way where it's it took a moment for me to connect the dots in my own life of that.
It's the journey. And like, how have you been able to reconnect with some of that childhood experience in nature with what you're doing today?
Oh, in a big way. When I travel across the country, I was telling you, I really love talking to community members, and it just warms my heart whenever I go, wherever across the country, and I talk to grandparents who love taking their grandkids outdoors, and I was like, that's like my grandma. Like my grandma did that for me, and a huge part of the work that we're doing at the department right now is working to ensure that every community across the country, no matter their zip code, no matter their background, everyone has an opportunity, a chance, and access to go outdoors. Whether that's at a national park or even a city park. We have a wonderful program to fund the expansion of city parks, because you don't have to go to Yellowstone, you don't have to go to the Everglades. Right. You can just go to your local park. And so we're making sure that folks across the country are able to access that. And so when I go to communities and I talk to elderly folks who oftentimes have dedicated their entire lives or decades of their lives to build a city park, and sort of hear from them about what it means to them to do that. It always just brings me back to my memories with my grandma, and how important it was for her to just be outdoors, and have us learn about the outdoors. So it's really special. And my boss, Secretary Holland, often talks about her own upbringing and how her grandparents influenced the way that she sees nature. Of course, we're from different generations, but yet we still have that same connection, which I find beautiful. And I think, and I wish that everyone could have a connection like that to their ancestors, but also to the land that or their waters that they live around.
Yeah. So Gio, there's a quote that I found on the Department of Interior's website that just kind of really fills me up, because it's like just speaks right to what we're trying to do here on this podcast. It says, and this was under the America the Beautiful campaign. It said, at the Department of the Interior, we know that nature is essential to the health, well-being, and prosperity of every family and every community in America. I mean, I love that. I just think it's so awesome to know that at the federal level, this is being acknowledged. And I just wanted to get your thoughts, Gio's thoughts, about why nature is so essential to health, well-being, and prosperity.
Oh, it's so important. You can look at it from like a science point of view, right? And I'm not a scientist, but if you, I'm sure if you Googled it, you'd find plenty of evidence that shows the importance of nature and the outdoors. But from a personal perspective, I know I feel better whenever if I'm having a tough week or a tough day. I know I feel better when I can just disconnect from life for a little bit and just go outside, And, I live here in DC, and I'm really thankful that DC has a ton of beautiful outdoor, green spaces, open spaces that folks could go out to just take a stroll. But if I think I one of the things I always think about is if anyone ever doubts the health and well-being and the benefits of going outdoors, just think about where were we during lockdown? We were in our homes, going crazy, and all of us, we all want to just be outside, right? We all just wanted to be outside. And why do we want to be outside? Why do we want to be outside? Because we wanted to just breathe in the air, right? Like be outdoors and not locked up in our homes. And during lockdown in 2020, I would go down to Rock Creek Park here in DC and just walk for hours and hours, and just enjoy the fresh air, listen to the creek, listen to the birds, and just enjoy that time. And that was such a if I didn't have that, I would have gone crazy. I would have gone crazy just being indoors all the time. And so, it's just so important that that people, that all of us have that access. And like I was saying before, it doesn't have to be a huge park. It doesn't have to be a national park. It could just be your backyard, your city park. But there's so many health and wellness benefits that come from just breathing some fresh air, and we can't take that for granted.
Yeah, so you've traveled quite a bit and you've seen a lot of these refuges and national parks and different places where we get to go experience that, like that healing, those health benefits, right?
Mhm.
What are some of your favorite spots, whether it's national parks or maybe you could share some hidden gems that people maybe don't often think about? What are some of your favorites?
Oh man, it's so hard because I have so many favorites. There's not been a place that I haven't enjoyed. So to pick one is really, really hard. But to be totally biased, I love the Everglades.
Yeah, Florida.
It is such a unique place, and there's truly no place like it in the entire world. Um, you have acres and acres of just wetlands that they call the Everglades the river of grass, because it's just as far as you can see, it's just grass that is growing out of the water, right? And it's such a weird sort of looking place, and you have these incredible creatures, right? From beautiful birds to alligators and frogs and all kinds of little critters everywhere, that are so easy to see. Actually, if anyone that's been to the Everglades or taken a tour can probably tell you a story of seeing a gator, because they're just out there, right?
Yeah.
And usually there's nothing to be scared of. Usually you're at a safe distance, but the sounds of the Everglades are so unique. I was listening actually to a podcast called Field Trip from the
Okay.
Washington Post. It's really cool. It's a brief series. And every episode they go to a different national park and they talk about the history of the park, sort of where they are now, and where they're going. And there was an episode in the Everglades, and there was a lot that I loved about it, but one of the things I loved about it was that it's a podcast and they go to the park and they record the sounds of that park.
Oh, cool.
And they start the podcast with the sound of the Everglades. And it's just it's beautiful, it's so unique. And so that's definitely up there in terms of one of my favorite parks. In terms of hidden gems, gosh, there's so many. but I always encourage people to explore their refuges, because again, people think that, you want to go big, you need to go to a big national park. And it's like, nah, you can go to a beautiful refuge around. And again, every state has one. And many states have urban national wildlife refuges, which are in urban areas. So they're a lot more accessible to access. And so I don't know if I have a favorite one, but certainly there's so many of them, and oftentimes they're hidden gems. They're not crowded. So don't expect to be in your car for an hour to get into them, like
Yeah.
which is the experience for so many folks when they go to a big national park. And so they're super accessible, easy to get into. Most of them are free, if not super low cost, and are just as beautiful and give you beautiful access to nature.
The wildlife refuge system. I love that. Definitely worth checking out. I have to go look and see which ones are in my state. I'm gonna do that when we get off of here. This is
Yeah.
great. All right. So as we kind of wrap up here, I've got to ask, Gio, what is it like for you to work for the White House and the president?
Definitely a pinch me moment on a
Yeah.
weekly basis.
Yeah.
I mean, it's awesome. I mean, it's awesome. Like, my parents brought me here to the US when, I was 9 years old.
Yeah.
I did not speak any English when I moved to the US. And to go through all the struggles that, many immigrant families go through, and, get an education, and then work on 2 presidential campaigns, and then be called up by the White House to do this job. It's crazy. And it's one of those things that, it sounds kind of corny, but it's like only happen in America. It's one of those things that only happen in America. And it's just incredible. It makes my family very proud. And, I'm proud that it makes them proud. But it's something that I always try to just be grateful for. It's it's one of those once in a lifetime opportunities to be able to work at the top of the federal government, and especially on the issues that I get to work on. It's incredible, and I'm just very, very grateful for all the folks in my life that helped me get to this point. And I don't know what's next. I've never known what's next, but I just enjoy the right now. And I just try to just be grateful for what I have.
I love that. I don't know what's next. I never know what's next. The question that I was going to ask next was going to be, around the fact that you've had all these different experiences. A lot of it is around you following your passions and then like watching to see like all that's unfolded for you and where you are now. And so the question was going to be, what advice do you have for others that kind of don't see what that path is?
Yeah.
I suspect it might be related to what you just said.
I think so. Yeah, I think sometimes it's just, following your heart, right? Following your heart. And, I was recently talking to at the department. I had a group of students from Florida International University who were visiting DC, and a friend asked if I could speak to this cohort of students about my life, being from Florida and working in the government. And what I told them is, I think, what I would tell anybody else, which is just, do what makes you happy. And sometimes, sometimes it's hard to see, 10 years, 5 years from now, it's sometimes hard to look forward in that way. But sometimes it just means taking one thing at a time and just following what you love. When I was in high school, I thought I was going to be a marine biologist or a scientist, and it didn't work out, and that was okay. And then in college, I realized, I could get involved in politics, and I did that, and then we lost an election, and I was like, what do I do with my life? And somehow all those things led me to where I am today. And that's okay. I think it's okay to not know, and it's okay to not be sure, as long as you're doing what you love. And certainly, if you're a young person, I think young people oftentimes feel the pressures, not just from family members, but from society as a whole, that tells you who you should be and what you should do. And it's okay to respectfully listen to all that, but at the end of the day, we each, chart our own path, and no path is like any other, right? We all have our own life, and we make our own choices, and that's the beautiful part about life, right? To just follow your heart and chart your own course.
I love it, Gio. And as you chart your own course and follow your heart, at some point Hollywood's going to pick up on you, and they're going to want to make a movie about your life's journey. And when they do, I want to know who's going to be the Hollywood actor that's going to play you in your movie.
Hopefully someone very good looking. You know what? Okay, this guy probably doesn't look like me, but I like him. So I'm going to go with Jacob Elordi, because he's like the Hollywood Edmund right now. So if anyone were to play me, I want it to be someone that people really like.
Jacob Elordi?
Yeah.
Nice. Okay. I love it. And what's your movie going to be called?
My movie, what would it be called? Should it be funny or should it be serious? I don't know. Like, I do know if my life would turn into a movie, it would have to be like a comedy drama
Love
sort of situation. I don't know. I mean, sticking with the theme of charting your own course, maybe like, yeah, charting courses, or
charting the course. I love it.
Charting the course. Yeah.
Okay. We've got it. We got it. We got it. I love it. This has been so awesome. I want to thank you for your time today, but not only that, I am such a big fan of the national park system. I'm going to become a fan of the National Wildlife Refuge system. I'm going to look into that and start exploring some of those as well. But
and if I could, sorry to cut you off quick. We talked a lot about the national parks, we talked a lot about refuges. There's also a Bureau of Land Management, which for folks out here on the East Coast, there's not a whole lot of BLM lands. But if you live in Arizona, Nevada, and California, there's just gorgeous public lands out there that are managed by the Bureau of Land Management, which are free. Red Rocks Canyon in which is like 30 minutes outside of Las Vegas. Beautiful. So sorry, I had to plug BLM as well, because they also manage a lot of beautiful public lands across the country.
All of these public places, they're all like amazing places to visit, but not just to visit and see, but to like go connect with nature, go connect with yourself. And it's, Department of the Interior is doing a fantastic job of making these places available to us. And so, I mean, gift yourself that and go see these places, go experience these places. So Gio, thank you to you for the work that you're doing, and thanks to the Department of the Interior for providing these places for us. If people want to find out more about you or the Department of Interior, what's the best place for them to do that?
Yeah, you can check out, you can go to the department's social media accounts. You can just, look up Department of the Interior on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram. And then for me, I am on Twitter or X, as it's called.
Nice.
I actually changed it recently. What is my new one? It's GROCCOOO. G Rocco.
Awesome.
X handle.
Gio, thank you so much for spending time with me today. For those listening, I hope you've been inspired today as much as I have. Hope Gio's story has encouraged you to listen to the voice inside that calls you to adventure, because we want to hear your story next. If you have a story to tell or just need a nudge to create one, please send me an email. We'd also appreciate it if you'd help us spread the word by leaving a review and sharing or tagging Inspire Campfire in your social media. And until next time, I want to encourage you to get outside. Thanks for listening. Gio, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Scott. Love the conversation.